So the challenge is to bring this to you in just two parts. I'm going to try. Probably not going to happen, but I'll try. This is the professor just sent me tons of notes. You know how much money for him to send a fax from that for find a fax machine in Egypt and then send it all the way here. It almost makes me want to set up a Patreon for the guy. All right. The cash come flowing in. All right. So I can't go over the whole debate. It's just too much. Worth your time to watch. Probably the single, if I didn't say in the intro, the absolute most important, unbelievable though that I'll cover really is. I've argued that we should argue from the periphery, and you know what I'm talking about if you've been following these videos on that. We should do that. You can't do that with this. This is the nuts and bolts right here. Okay, so I'm just selecting the big ticket issues that I think will cover the most of the debate as I possibly can. So I'll try to keep this from being me reading the whole time, which is why this may end up being a third part. So the first real sticking point worth discussing, I think, is the size of Capernaum. Now, it is not fully clear why. It's Williams responding to some of Bart Ehrman's writings, and it's not clear. It's not apparent why this matters. My guess is that as the documents and oral traditions transmitted from the rural areas, I guess that makes Bart Ehrman think, I could be wrong about this because it's just not clear. They don't say. I've looked at it, I've watched it so many times and I can't figure it out. I'd have to read Ehrman's book for myself and I don't have access to it. I have some of his books, but not this one. I think I have some of his books. Anyway, so the idea of it being in a rural area is that not as many people had access to the information that was being disseminated, and so that lended itself more to errors and exaggerations and changes. And what I could be wrong about that, and what Williams says is, well, no, you have Capernaum, and Capernaum was a large city. Okay, so it's not fully clear why, but Williams is responding to some of Ehrman's writings that apparently imply that copies from rural areas alone is inferior to large settlements like Capernaum. Again, not sure why that is. Now Ehrman, this is really interesting. He says that Capernaum's not that large according to archaeology. That's not a very large city. And Williams does a really good job. He says this. He goes, well, wait a minute now. Now, I'm making it sound like Williams is like responding. It's not. He does a lot of blah, 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 blah. And in searching for words, and it really comes off like he's backpedaling, but he's not. He holds his ground really well. He notes that there were 2 Roman wars, and he says because there are 2 Roman wars, Capernaum, the stones had to be reused and put in different places to create embattlements and embankments and to stop the enemy from coming. So 2 wars. And Ehrman says, well, stones basically can be traced back to their origins. And he says this happens in archaeology all the time. And I would have said, but I'm an American, so I would have said, oh, two Roman wars happens all the time in archaeology, other than in Rome? Because the idea is this. How do you trace that back? It's not enough. This again, is appeal to authority. It's not enough to go, well, archaeologists can trace back rocks to their origins. Stones, rather, not rocks. Because the idea here is they're carved, used for buildings, then reused. And Bart Ehrman didn't say, he said replaced. So I think that was a mistake. I think he meant, given the context that he meant, I'm confident he meant they can be traced back to their origins. And I would say, listen, 2 Roman wars, don't tell me that some places somewhere in the world stones can be traced back. The Easter Island, they figured out how essentially how those got there, right? I mean, I think there's some questions about that, but they understand the stones came from that area. They are able to trace back quarries and all that. That is able to happen. You're telling me after 2 Roman wars, and Williams is very specific. He says 900 settlements were uprooted. Archaeology figures out where those stones came from all the time. Do you know how big the Mediterranean is? How big a battlefield, what we know about the way Roman wars went is they went to Britain, they went to war. And I guess that towards this time, it might have been when they were being attacked, but still, you have to do better than say archaeology retraces stones back to their origins. I'm sorry, yeah, back to their origins all the time. That's appeal to authority. I would have called him on that immediately. And Ehrman did not speak rhetorically. Who won the exchange? In this exchange, Ehrman won. He won for rhetorical reasons. You can hear what I'm saying. Did he win on substance? No. Williams won on substance, but it doesn't. That's what really matters, right? That's the football. However, if you were in an auditorium and heard this, trust me, watch the debate yourself. You'll see that Williams he doesn't look rattled, but he looks like he's searching for words, and it doesn't look good. And he doesn't call Ehrman out on his rhetoric. This is a rhetorical stunt. Archaeologists say this. What do archaeologists say about these 2 Roman wars? Where are you getting your data? Now listen, I may be sounding like I'm calling Ehrman to the mat. Ehrman in this exchange is calling Williams to the mat on his data and asking Williams to be more specific. And he himself is not being specific. So Ehrman then, again, masterfully, in my opinion, pushes Williams, who already kind of mentioned it, but pushes Williams to talk about Josephus's. He gets Williams to say it. He doesn't say it himself. He gets Williams to say it, which is good. He gets him to talk about Josephus's population reports and explains that they are exaggerated and therefore unreliable. But remember we talked about the way ancient sources phenomenalized or addressed phenomena. We don't know how Josephus got his answers. Apparently they're always exaggerated. But the way that they appear to him is the way he reports them. So if he saw Capernaum with his own eyes, he may have thought it was large, and his assumption about large meant a certain population size, which turns out to be inaccurate. Now, it's not the Bible, so we don't really care if it's inaccurate that much. It doesn't affect our theology at all or whatever. But the point here is that they did things based on visualization. I don't recall what Williams' response to this was. But on substance, Williams got a big win here, in my opinion. Unfortunately, he didn't have the rhetoric to match it up, and that's too bad. Now, Williams shows that Luke reported the landscape accurately. This is a big, contentious portion of the debate. It's very interesting. Sometimes when people speak, if you ever want to do any creative writing and you're going to have characters speaking, never have the character tell you first what they're thinking. Human beings don't do that. It's very interesting. Ehrman kept going, that's not why I have a problem with that. I agree with you. That's not why I'm skeptical about this. And it looked like he was going to drop the other foot at any time. And Williams just kept looking over at Justin Briley and looking back and going, okay, and just kept talking. And it was just like he felt like he was walking into a trap, And it was masterful on Ehrman's part. And look, I'm not trying to make Ehrman sound like this master debater. He was just very, wow, did I really just say that? Okay, well, anyway, he really did assert himself in an entertaining way. And you would have been, even though I doctrinally radically disagree with Bart Ehrman, and again, in the debates I've seen him in, he just gets destroyed, and he knows. He looks panicked when his voice starts elevating. It becomes even louder. It looks like he's getting destroyed. It's hard. I saw him prior to this as just a punching bag, and it was hard to see Ehrman stick it to somebody, but he was, and I have to give him credit. Now Now, Ehrman seems to think this is a non sequitur. What's a non sequitur? Well, Luke reports the landscape really, really accurately. I mean, he went through an effort to do this, okay? And Ehrman says, look, that's a non sequitur. Why would an author make efforts to be accurate, but then get the big ticket items wrong? Now, Ehrman didn't say that. I'm saying that. He's going, it doesn't matter if he reported on whether there's sycamore trees there or not. But it does matter. It does matter because it means that the effort to be accurate was there. Now, if the effort to be accurate was there, why would he get the big ticket items wrong? Now, Ehrman has a good answer to this. And we're going to get to in a minute. Now, but let me continue on this point. So when people visit World War II death camps, okay, can they be inaccurate in their overall understanding of what was happening regarding the SS and other things? I mean, do they know anything about the Thule Society or the Tool Society, where Hitler went and that sort of became National Socialism, came out of that? Do you need to know that to know what you see at a Nazi death camp? No, right? So could they be inaccurate in their overall understanding? Sure, yeah, they can be. But what if they went to the Nazi death camp to deliberately report on something about the origins of the SS and National Socialism? Think they got the big ticket items wrong? I don't think so. And Williams in so much says the exact same thing. Now, this is where Ehrman's response, this is what he's been holding on to. All right? This is what he's had in his back pocket. That's why I'm saying people don't always just come out and tell you what they're thinking. Sometimes they hold on to what they're saying. And sometimes they never actually get to the point. Sometimes they speak around what they're really talking about, which made the debate more interesting. Okay? So the question Ehrman brings up is, despite accuracy of the geographical reporting, it does not address the oral tradition in Palestine. It's a fair point. He's saying, look, how does Luke know that despite he doesn't agree that he interviewed anyone, but despite who he spoke to, if he did interview people, despite his efforts don't mean that the oral tradition is reliable. And he was trying to show this meant Williams was out of bounds in regard to scholarship on this issue. Williams' answer is really good. Rhetorically, not so great, but I like his answer. Williams explains that there is a mode of disambiguity found around names in the oral tradition, and this speaks to potential answers for the accuracy of the oral tradition. Now, what he's saying is this. So you have, how many Marys are there at this time? A lot, right? What does oral tradition do? It starts to create disambiguity as to who these people are. Why would oral tradition do that if oral tradition had no interest in being accurate? Another thing that I don't believe Ehrman addressed, again, Ehrman did this thing where and I may have it here, additionally, Ehrman seems to see the oral tradition as a phone game that is a linear progression. That is unlikely. That is highly unlikely. It is likely that two people can report two different things on the same thing, right? But given the nature of language, they might both be accurate. Let me give you an example. One person says on 9/11, Tower 1 and Tower 2 were hit by two separate airplanes. That's accurate. Someone else might say on September 11th, 2001, the World Trade Center was attacked. Also accurate. The nature of language is analogical. Both accurate. But let's say you have 8 people. They're changing their language a little bit, but one of them says, well, it wasn't actually terrorists. It was this manifold of the U.S. government. There might be some that go, well, we're just talking of the 8, 7 of them might say, oh, the person going there to get the data of the 7, one of them might go, well, listen, that's a theory. That's not physically what everyone saw, though. You see? How hard would it be to figure that out? You may not even need someone to tell you that, right? It's so the other thing is this idea of a phone game. That's the assumption here, is that it's passed on generically, one to another, one to another. That's not the case, right? I talked about this in an earlier video. It's more like a complex system of roots. That's the written tradition. It's probably the oral tradition too. Why should the written tradition be a different manifestation? It wouldn't be. So it's highly unlikely. And the other thing about the phone game is that it doesn't acknowledge the existential issue. The existential issue is this. What do I mean? There was an immediacy to the desire to get these stories out. But not just that. The early church, as well as the church today, has always seen it important that people hear the message of Christ's death for sin on the cross. This has always been important. And so that message is so critical that if I go to report it to someone else, it's very different than me reporting on whether there's a sale on bagels or not. And Ehrman appeals to, and he names one professor, but he appeals to studies of oral traditions and says they get it wrong all the time. Now, this isn't his main point, okay? Not his main point. This isn't his critical point, but it's a very similar to the debate earlier with Jordan Peterson and Blackmore, where she goes, well, statistics say that in these states where religion is, flourishing, that you have these problems and blah, blah, blah. That's not adequate. And in this case, it's not adequate either because of the existential issue of the quote-unquote phone game. Let me give you an example. It's not a phone game, but even if it were, this would just further my point, even if it were a phone game. It wasn't a phone game. That's an assumption. It was a complex network of people that could hold each other accountable. And it wasn't just in rural areas. It was probably in Capernaum, which apparently was a big city. Williams made that point, I think. But whatever the case, in the phone game, if you don't know what it is, you start at the beginning. We did this in one of my classes in school. Start with the first person. You give them information. You might say something like, teddy bears are fun to have. By the time you get to the end of it, it may say something like, there are dinosaurs on Mars, right? They whisper the message to each other. Now, I've always said this. Well, what if you have a door in the back room and it's got a code on it? It's a 3-digit code. The building's on fire. But in order to escape, you have to play the phone game. And you go to the first person and you say, the code to escape is 333. Or if it was Bart Ehrman, it'd be 666. All right, anyway. Joking. 333. Is it possible, logically possible, not probable, just logically possible, that by the time you got to the last student, the number would be right? Is it more possible than if the information's trivial? Of course it's more possible than the information being trivial. Since Bart Ehrman can't point to a specific example of how that relates to oral tradition and how this would mess up, I have no reason to believe him. No offense. I think he's an honest guy. But I think his honesty, if this academic world had great answers, he'd be mentioning them. If they had, by the way, he'll later say that in Mark, if Jesus had claimed deity, Mark would have mentioned it. Okay, if there are great, overwhelming academic pursuits and good examples how oral tradition fails, why aren't you mentioning what those are? Why didn't Ehrman mention what those are? He doesn't. I think that says a lot. All right. Oh, wow. Okay, still a lot to go here. What we're going to get to next is going to be, I'm going to continue this part of the debate. He concludes then, he says, look, that wasn't even his main point. Even that notwithstanding about oral tradition, he says the only way we can know if the oral tradition was corrupted is by comparing the stories in the Gospels. Big can of worms. So it all boils down to, here's the Super Bowl, right? It all boils down to this. if there are differences in the gospel, has oral tradition been sacrificed? We'll talk about that next.